Good evening. Welcome to the School of Visual Arts I3 lecture series hosted by the Masters in Digital Photography Department. We are thrilled to welcome photographer and MPS Digital Photography class of 2015 alum Kathryn Mussallem.
Mussallem.
Exactly. Also fondly referred to as Kitty. Now, Kitty is an exhibiting photographer and visual artist with work published and exhibited in Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, and Europe. Her solo exhibition, Tattoos and Scrimshaw, The Art of the Sailor, was featured to great critical acclaim at the Vancouver Maritime Museum and the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum. Just worked herself up the West Coast. Okay. She's an instructor of photography, digital media, and visual arts at the Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver. And most recently, very recently, this weekend, Kitty has spent a week aboard the SS New York.
USS.
And has been spent the weekend finding, chasing, and photographing sailors. Or in other words, really doing what she loves. Please help me welcome Kitty.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kitty, and I chase sailors. That's how I introduce myself these days. It wasn't the world that I came from, but it is the world I've ended up in. So I came from academics, and I came from the visual arts, and then I ended up traveling around North America chasing sailors. So I've spent the last 8 years literally exactly to this week. I started at New York Fleet Week 2011. And this is the image that started it all. It was night one of Fleet Week in 2011, and the sailors, I had just sailed into town, expecting to hit the town, the big old town of New York City. Most of them had never been here before. And I hit the city having no idea what I was in for. No idea, literally. It was not the world I expected. So this is the world I fantasized about when I was younger. I watched musicals, I watched old Hollywood movies, and I wanted to be Marlene Dietrich. I wanted to be dancing in this nightclub, surrounded by sailors. And I love the fact that she has to be followed around because every sailor tries to jump on her. And this is the world I wanted to be in. I didn't realize that it was going to be possible. When I started the project, I first saw the sailors and I thought, do they really wear these uniforms in real life? This isn't the movies. This isn't the 1940s. They do it in this day and age. The man's in the Navy. Yay! So I want to be in this bar room. I wanted the sailors to be around me. I wanted to see them fighting and singing and doing all the stuff that they were going to be doing. And it kind of ended up happening. I wanted to be Clara Bow, like in these old movies. And kind of happened. So this is me at work. This is me in probably, I think it's 2015 Fleet Week, maybe 16, maybe 17, I can't remember anymore. And I think it was 2017, and this is just in a Hell's Kitchen dive bar, as I always am, and close to the sailors only go so far, close to the ship, and this is how I shoot. I photograph with an off-camera flash. This is the photo that started it all. So I had no idea what to expect when I started the project. So I took this photo and it was in color and I was just sort of figuring out the technique I was using, and it wasn't exactly what I wanted the next morning. And then I turned it black and white and my life changed because it brought me back in time. It brought me to 1943. It brought me to those movies that I grew up with. So this is me on the town shooting. New Orleans, it's very classy. You can tell by the plastic cup and the cigarette butts. And that's me meeting Sailor Trouble. So that was the minute I was meeting him, and those were his feet, and this is Sailor Trouble. That's what I call him. He looked like trouble. And basically, the sailors perform their part, and so do I. So it is a performance that I'm doing with the sailors. They find the ladies, They grab them, they kiss them, they pick them up in the bars, they dance just like in the movies. I always wanted this to be in this place where the sailors jumped up on the bar, grabbed a mop, and did a little dance. And it kind of happens for me, like literally all last weekend. This is called My Eyes Are Up Here Sailor, and that's Sailor Anthony and Sailor Josh. And this is in a bar in Seattle. And one's married and one's single. I'll let you guess which one's which of the two. On the streets of New Orleans, the sailors dance with every woman that they can dance with, every person. This lady, she is out every night on the streets, like dancing, and then day 2 of Fleet Week, she went, oh, it's Fleet Week, and she puts on her sailor outfit, and she does this every time. So the way that people interact with the sailors on the streets, sometimes they're excited to see them. Sometimes they're giving them the stink eye from the side, like, who's this guy? Why are they here? And then sometimes they're just like, talk to the hand, sailor. And it's always very interesting to me because they're not, the people's interactions with them varies from city to city. It varies with the kind of people that see them. This is a Canadian sailor on the streets of San Francisco, and he's from a ship that I'm very familiar with, the HMCS Calgary. They actually have a cowboy hat as their cover. That's what they call their hat in the Navy. And I just love how this woman is just looking at him like, who's this guy? What's going on here? So when people ask me why I do this, all I can say is, I love sailors. And I giggle, and I can't not giggle. So, you know, it came from really, it was like part fetish for me. It's something I was enamored with. And then it became this exotic fascination. I'm a Canadian, if you didn't hear from the introduction, and I'm fascinated by this hyperbolic brand of American patriotism that I see in the Navy. It's something that's so foreign to us as Canadians. And I started the project like an outside observer, like I was on a safari. I was looking at them from a distance, and then what ended up happening is I got closer. And I became one of these people, and this is the way people interact. Sometimes they look, as I showed you, with disdain. Sometimes like, what's going on? Who is this guy? Why are they here? And then sometimes it's just pure joy. And it's pure happiness that when the sailors are on the streets. And New Orleans. And I just love the interactions. And so it's part of the project I have is the photographing of the interactions. This is at a parade, and I just love this. It's called Selfie with a Sailor. And this is like these ladies just swooning and getting so excited. It's like these sailors are going by at this parade, and they're giggling, and they're just like me. So sometimes they're a little bit messy. Sometimes the ladies are misbehaving, definitely misbehaving. New York Fleet Week, this one. And definitely misbehaving. So this is this kind of strange world that I've entered into. Now, something about the sailors is not only has their uniform not changed. This is the traditional uniform that's been the same since the 1800s. This is 13 buttons that at the end of a night of a sailor being on the town, as you can notice, most of them can't button most of the buttons up. But the thing about the sailors is, like their uniform, they don't change. So they look the same as they did back in the day. And they honestly perform the same as they did back in the day. It's this retro fantasy that I had of these sailors hitting the town like I'm in one of those movies from the 1940s and 50s that I grew up not in. And I kind of am enamored by it. So I don't only just photograph the sailors when they hit the town, but this project, because it's been 8 years of my life, I photograph the sailors at work, as I photograph them at play, and then I also photograph another element, and I'll show you in a few minutes. So at work, when I'm photographing the Navy, I'm out at sea. I'm on Navy ships. Last week, I came in on the USS New York, up from Virginia, and I spend days at sea. I've gone on deployments before, and it's a portrait project where I'm looking at these people who aren't very humanized. They're anonymous. They're in their uniforms. They just are numbers in a fleet. Troops, these anonymous collective nouns that describe them. And I didn't ever realize, like, oh, each troop means a person. And then I started to realize they are all people. So I'm looking at them close. I'm photographing them, I'm having conversations, I'm spending days and time with them, I'm giggling, I'm smiling, we're comparing tattoos. I'll show you some stuff later. And this is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean on I think it's the USS Baton. I can't even remember anymore. I'd have to look back at it to figure it out. But I photograph these sort of like events when they go out to sea. This is the USS Constitution in Boston. It goes out one day a year for the 4th of July. So I went out many years ago. And I'm photographing them when they're doing their training exercises. And I hope that the work that I do on the streets and combined with the stuff of them at work starts to show you who they are. Starts to humanize them. They are people. They're not just a fleet. They're not just troops. This is on the HMCS Calgary, which I've gone on deployment with. I went across the Pacific Ocean with them. I went on a grant with the Canadian government, so I went across the Pacific, and I spent the whole week with all these sailors, and then I subsequently spent more time with them after, and once we were at this world largest naval exercise in the world called RIMPAC in Hawaii. And when I'm photographing them on this longer period of time, they start to act even more natural because I was considered a member of the crew. I was ship's company when I arrived. So I started a stranger, and I arrived in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor, and I was considered ship's company. So they became my friends. I'm still in contact with many of them. And a lot of the sailors over the 8 years of this project have become my friends, and they've been close to me. On my 41st birthday, I happened to get up in a helicopter, and I got to photograph aerials of the ship. So that's me. That's my feet hanging out of the helicopter over the Pacific Ocean. It was pretty insane. So the adventures I've had, all the helicopter rides I've been on, all the different types of ships, all the different types of, like, all these vehicles, LCACs, these things that are like tanks, these hovercrafts, all of these things. It's a real adventure. And when I am photographing them at sea, as we come into New York, this is from last year's Fleet Week, when I'm photographing them as they come in to New York, I also talk to them and ask them about the excitement they have when they come into the city. I think out of all the Fleet Weeks that I photograph, I've photographed about 27 Fleet Weeks at this point in time, all over North America. And I think from them, New York is the most excited. It's the one the sailors are super excited for because the majority of them have never, ever been to the city. And when they're at work, as I said, they're human. They're normal. They're like you and me. They get tired. They fool around. And then there's things like it was 110 degrees in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and these Navy divers, they were not happy. I photographed them when I was on my way out with the Canadians, the Canadian divers. Oh, hey, these are New Zealand divers. Forgot about them. And I asked if I could photograph them, and they said, oh, we'll do some exercises for you. So they got dressed up in their little exercise outfits, and I sat on the beach in San Diego, in Camp Pendleton, the Marine base in San Diego. And I sat there on the beach, and all these men performed exercises around me. They picked each other up and threw each other over their shoulders, and it was ridiculous. And it was like that helicopter that I went in. The ship was at my command. The ship was doing donuts and figure eights below me for my aerial photographs of the ship. And then in this one, these guys just got out and exercised for me in tiny little shorts. It was terrible. And then this is right after I photographed those very grumpy Navy divers in Pearl Harbor in the 110-degree weather. I got on, this is a Canadian diver's rib, and we went out on this little sort of inflatable motorboat, and we went out, and I after 3-4 hours on this thing, I just tanned my legs and laid down and had a nap. So this is me at work as a photographer. And then what I find is when I'm shooting and I'm out in these when I'm on these work events, I find that, first of all, for the most part, I am the only woman around, let alone the only female photographer. So usually I'm one of the only female photographers when I'm working, and all the other photographers around me have lenses that you would not believe. And when we're on a boat, like, you can only look so far. Yeah. And I always get a good giggle about the people around me because I shoot with a prime short lens, usually wide. And when I'm photographing, I'm right there. I'm having a conversation and I'm interacting with the sailors or the Marines or whoever that I'm photographing. And I look at these guys, and my favorite was, I was on a Japanese ship in San Diego, and none of the photographers could hold their lenses anymore, so they had them all laid out on the flight deck. So I often pull back with my wide lens, and I look at the circus around me, and I look at the show. And I'm always reminded of a quote, Robert Capa. If your pictures aren't good enough, you aren't close enough. And I am so reminded of that because I'm constantly in these situations where everyone's got all this equipment dangling off of them, all of this stuff around them. And I'm like, hi, right in front of them with my little 20 millimeter lens, like just having this conversation. So it just changes the story. So I photograph the sailors on the town, I photograph them at work, and then I also photograph Navy homecomings. And I would have to say that if you don't tear up at a Navy homecoming, you are dead inside because it's impossible not to get like verklempt about it. You just get emotional because often these sailors haven't seen their families. It's usually about a 8 or 9 month deployment. And then when they return home, they're often, oh God, the ladies this day, this is in Norfolk, Virginia. The ladies were all dolled up. They were all ready. Their sailors are coming. They had their makeup. They had their hair perfect. And right when the ship's pulling in, and it just stormed and rained, and their makeup was running, and their signs they had made and their children had made were all running. And it's just like, oh, heartwarming. And the kids are all dressed up. If their dad's a pilot, they're dressed up like little pilots. If their dad's a sailor, they're dressed up like little sailors. And for the most part, you will see these babies, and they've never met their dads or their mom, or not their moms. They've obviously met them, but they've never met their dads because they were born when their dad was on deployment. So it's really something when you see it. And so one of the things I photograph are homecomings. This one's in Norfolk, Virginia as well. Most of them are that I photographed. And this one's up in the Pacific Northwest where I live. And I love this kid because he's just not having it. He was so tired of being interviewed. He had the news there, and the kid's like, I just want my dad. So, and the joy, and the hugs, and the running, and the crying, and the emotion. It's just like, oh, you have to love it. So. And then this is on like a tarmac when their dads, they were Prowler pilots, and they came home. And they had been out for 10 months on deployment in the Pacific. And they came home, and their kids are all dressed up like little pilots. And I love this guy. I love this guy. I do have a shot, but it wasn't my favorite, where he literally had them up his nose. So it was. And then, of course, he's been out 10 months. First thing he's going to grab is that bottle of champagne. So the largest part of this project, this ongoing documentary project, this immersive documentary project where I have become a part of this world that I'm in, the largest part is when the sailors are on the town. So these next few shots are actually from the last week. This is from Fleet Week, New York, and this is from me like hitting the town this week. Exhausted already. I was exhausted when it started because I came up on that ship, and I am still exhausted because they just left yesterday. So this is on the town. These are some Canadian sailors out with some American sailors. And, karaoke night. We have to. So then, of course, Fleet Week. And so this is every single person in the place is kissing, you know, as you do. And then a popular destination for women on their bachelorette party just happens to be Fleet Week. And so I photographed this week 4 separate bachelorette parties of women. And this one I love because the bride put on a Marines cover and she was like out on the dance floor, and it was just like, it was perfect. It was a perfect moment. And then there were some push-up contests where the sailors and the Marines were seeing who could do more push-ups on the middle of this dive bar floor, which was truly disgusting. But, you know.
Which bar?
No, it's my secret. It's up in Hell's Kitchen. It's the place I go every year. And so, yeah. And of course, the sailors like to go to places that are the closest you can possibly get to the ship. And every year the sailors do the exact, somebody will do this. They will recreate the famous nurse kiss with the sailor at the end of the war. And every year someone does it. And so I kind of have to capture it because this is one of the chances when they're definitely performing for me. For the most part, I'm just documenting what's happening around me. But because I'm shooting with a short lens and I'm shooting with a flash and all of this stuff, I'm right there. I'm in their face. So I'm not hiding in the shrubbery. I'm not in the bushes with a telephoto lens. I'm part of the story. So they know I'm there, obviously. This is in San Francisco. This is the Marines. So they never disappoint. They're always what I want. There's always a performance. As a Canadian sailor, you don't even want to ask me why he has white handprints on his butt, but there is in this parade in San Francisco that happens every year. There is the Baudin Bakery has they have like sacks of flour and they're throwing it around, and somehow people got in a fight with the flour, and then everybody was walking around with white handprints on their bums all night long. So in North Beach in Little Italy of San Francisco. And, you know, the sailors, I'm having this conversation, so they're there for me. And then this is on a crowded dance floor in New Orleans, and this photo actually won the Sony World Photography Awards Canadian National Prize in 2000. Thank you. It was 2016. I can't even remember sometimes, but it's all been part of this long adventure. And so this photograph won this award. It exhibited in London. I got flown to the awards. They gave me a lovely Sony camera. And I'm always looking at this world. I'm looking at the sailors as they perform, and they never disappoint. These are actually Marines that are out there. But the Marines, they are a department of the Navy. And if you ever ask a Marine, if you say, "Are you a department of the Navy?" they like to tell you, "Yes, we're the men's department." So that's what Marines do. But they perform. Portland, Fleet Week, back in New York. I know Kathryn likes this one. I remember you put it in. I don't know why. It's just the usual hot mess of a Fleet Week. I'll just go over this one fast. New Orleans. And then, so it's sometimes salacious, it's sometimes scandalous, but then it's also sometimes tender. And this British sailor is meeting a lovely lady on the streets of New Orleans, having a nice tender moment. So it's all levels of what you expect. It's just everything. And then there's these unexpected moments. So whether I'm photographing them at work or I'm photographing them at play, I'm always on the lookout for these weird juxtapositions, strange things that are happening around you. So this is when I arrived in Hawaii in Pearl Harbor, and it just happened that at the very moment we were manning the rails, which is when the sailors line up along the rails of the ship, in their cowboy hats, because this is the HMCS Calgary. At that very moment, a jumbo jet flew over our heads, and all the sailors look up, and I just happened to be shooting when it happened. So it's these unexpected moments. There was a parrot on the street, and there was some sailors. So this is New Orleans. And it's all of these strange things that happen around me. coming in on, I think this was the USS Baton. I can't even remember anymore. But the New York Jets cheerleaders showed up, and it was windy, and it was freezing cold, and they were wearing mini skirts and go-go boots, and their skirts flew up in the air. And I just thought, this is how absurd is this? The sailors and the Marines are manning the rails, and as we're going under the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in this windy storm, these ladies, whoop, and I was like, okay. So, you know, and high heel go-go boots. And we're told when we get on a ship not to wear high heels. So it's always very funny when they do. And these perfect moments. So this is in Seattle Fleet Week, and this is this bar I go to every year. For like 7, 8 years I've gone to this bar. And then there's a riding bull. And I always photograph, and I always get someone on the riding bull, and I always get someone on the floor. But I never catch them in midair as they fly off of the riding bull. So that was the perfect moment. And when I got this shot, I went, I'm done, and I left, and I went home. And I think the next morning, I actually just drove back home to Vancouver. I was like, oh, I've got the shot, I'm done. So that was Seattle Fleet Week. I was like, done. So there are these ridiculous moments, and sometimes you're like, what is happening? So New Orleans, New York, and I love, my favorite part in this photograph is the guy in the middle. His face looks like a cartoon, and it doesn't even look real. So this is New York Fleet Week, maybe 2 years ago, I think 2017 perhaps. And then there's tattoos. And tattoos are always a favorite of mine. First of all, it's a great way to get men to take off their shirts in the middle of the street. And sometimes their pants. My apologies. This one is in a dive bar bathroom in San Francisco. And this is, he's a Marine, and he was describing his tattoo, and he said, we have to go into the bathroom to show you my tattoo. And I was like, I don't understand why. And I realized it's because the Marines their shirts are attached to their socks. And so they have little suspenders that keep their shirt stays. And so in order to take off his shirt, he had to go in the bathroom. So, you know. It's a performance. This is actually in New York this week, this one. It's a Canadian sailor. Sailors. Tattoos. I also interact sometimes. And I love it because it's their identity, the tattoos. And it is something the sailors brought to the world. They basically brought the art of all of these ports and all of these countries and these places they visited. They are the ones that brought tattooing to the Western world, to everybody else. And I did a lot of history of tattooing when I had my exhibition on tattoos, of naval tattoos. And I get them photographing them at work. This is out at sea near San Francisco. Don't bring your guns to town. This one is one of my favorites because you don't notice it at first, but it's called There's Something Going On Behind the Tattoo. Yeah. The sailor is taking his pants off. It's probably, I'm trying to take a good guess, he probably was showing me, the other sailor was probably showing me a tattoo a minute earlier. And it's just such a strange, ridiculous thing that, you know, there's a sailor behind the fact. And then the end. But when it comes to the sailors and their tattoos, it's very personal for me because on the USS Wasp in New Orleans in the year 2012, I may have gotten a tattoo from a sailor. So, and like all good stories, I don't know why he's playing the harmonica, but this is me getting a tattoo in an electrical shop on the USS Wasp in New Orleans. Sailor asked me, do you want to get a tattoo? And I was like, yep. So I always say, yep, and I'll go ahead and do it. So, you know, it's like I'm always there for the story, so why not? So, sailors. So they never disappoint me. Like the musicals of old Hollywood that I was obsessed with when I was a kid, where they get up and dance, they fight. Oh, well, they pick up ladies too. It's always a little bit messy. Oh dear. End of the night, these poor sailors. Actually, I was driving my car in Seattle this night, and either these guys or some of their buddies thought I was an Uber and they tried to get back in the back of my car. So they actually got in my backseat of my car. And I was like, no, no, I'm not an Uber. You didn't notice the Canadian license plates, I guess, but you know. New Orleans. Probably my favorite, messiest Fleet Week. This guy was a great story. I asked him about his tooth, and he said, oh, I was blown up. That's how he lost his tooth, and it hadn't been replaced yet. So he was in Afghanistan, and that's how he lost his tooth. He was a Marine. Oh, hot mess. And the sailors with the background of very Americana baseball game. This guy, I see him every year. He looks like he stepped out of Central Casting. This is like the perfect New York cop, this guy. And he's always in my hunting grounds and photograph him. The sailors are friends, they're comrades, there's camaraderie, it's their family when they're at sea. They're dogs when they are the handlers of the military working dogs. They're also family. So, strange interactions. San Francisco Fleet Week. Portland Fleet Week. It's actually a go-go dancer. I'm not in a strip club. New York Fleet Week. And the sailors, as I said, I don't know what year it is. That's why some of them are black and white. They do what they're supposed to do. They never disappoint. Like the musicals that I grew up with, all the Hollywood movies, they get up and dance. They really get up and dance. This is in New Orleans, on Bourbon Street. This photo is called a hot mess, and it is a hot, sweaty mess of writhing people dancing. There's a lot of joy in it. They fight. I don't know if they're fighting in this shot, you know, but they're doing what sailors are supposed to do. They literally pick up ladies. They chat up ladies. They're ridiculous. They almost always end up 3 sheets to the wind, which is a Navy expression for not being able to stand up straight. And they're my life. And like Clara Bow in the old movie stills, when she's pointing at this sailor, telling him what's up, like this lady is. Clara Bow surrounded by her sailors. Me, surrounded by my sailors. Me, surrounded by my sailors. And I'm on the hunt for salty tales, shenanigans, and nostalgia, cliche, and humor are guiding the viewer through my adventures. And I hit the streets, and I see these boys in white, and I put on my bright red lipstick, and I put on my bright red high heels, and I giggle. Tee. And I go up to them, and I have an opening line. Oh, there's me shooting. Hey, sailor, new in town. And that's how I introduce myself. And I still do from this day, from the very first moment I met a sailor on the streets. There you go. So I hope you enjoy them as much as I do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Can't wait for the next year's Fleet Week. We have time for some questions. I have a microphone. I'll pass it around. It does not amplify your voice. It's for the video. We say that every week. Does anybody have any questions?
Please ask me questions.
Yes. Well, I have some questions, of course.
Of course.
Well, I'll start with one. There aren't women sailors too?
Oh, yes. There's about 20% of the Navy and the Marine Corps that are female.
Do they behave or not? Oh.
I have photos of both misbehaving on all sides. It's actually, if you look at some of the hot messes, there's definitely, I think there's some ladies in there. Is there? No, not on that one. But there's definitely some female sailors. I mean, she's not misbehaving, but you know, there is definitely, I actually have women that misbehaved almost as much. And I find that actually the women on the street, like the civilians that, like me, are like, oh my God, sailors, which is what I do. It's like, it used to embarrass my friends because I would see a sailor and I'd be like, sailors, and I'd scream. And then my friends would be like, oh no, this again. And the ladies, the civilians, I think they actually misbehave way more. It's almost like they have license to misbehave. I think the uniform does it. It makes people feel like they can do whatever they want because of the fact that they're these anonymous, like uniformed men. They all look the same. Yeah.
And so, I mean, we see the sailors, and we saw them last week in New York, and they get like free bus rides and things. So when they're on the ship, I mean, there's like no alcohol or partying.
Not in the American Navy, no. It's a dry Navy, yeah. So there's no partying. So it's kind of, the fact of the matter is you've got a frat house of 20-year-old people, like kids, college age. If you think about what you were doing in college and in your early 20s, and the fact of the matter is for weeks/months at a time, you're just in your dorm room working and not allowed to do the kind of things that people do as an outlet when they're 20. When you hit the ports, when you get into a city, wherever it is, you do go crazy. And the Canadian Navy is not dry. They have bars on our ships. The British Navy have bars. The French Navy has bars. Most of the navies of the world. But the Americans are dry. And the Canadians are now dry at sea, but they still have a bar when they're in port. So, yeah, we used to have a beer ration in the Canadian Navy. Yeah, but they didn't have it when I went on deployment. It was, the drinking on ships was taken away 2 weeks before I went on deployment, and I was having my birthday when I was at sea, and I was so sad. But it's okay because they put me in a helicopter. So, that was what I did.
How do you get deployed if you're not in the service?
Yeah.
So just as a civilian, I kind of, when I started the project, I definitely was faking it till I made it. Like I was definitely, I was doing some work for galleries and magazines and stuff, smaller ones. But I just developed relationships. I went up through the chain of command. I got permission from the military. Amazing. Yeah, and I'm a Canadian too. So technically I'm a foreign national. So, but I went through security clearances and checks, and yeah. And then because I know so many people, it just sort of keeps going into it, and yeah. And then because of all my exhibitions, and I work for San Diego Maritime Museum, and I'm officially the San Francisco Fleet Week photographer. So, yeah. So I'm legit now.
And, okay, here, ma'am.
Yeah.
Please.
I had a wonderful time this weekend.
No, it doesn't. It just.
I had a wonderful time. I say once a year during Fleet Week, sailors make women feel like $1 million.
You do.
It's
And
just
they
wonderful. They're
do.
so charming, and I go over and I say thank you for your service, and they
Yeah.
love that. It's so much fun.
They're handsome. They're young.
They're handsome.
They're
It's like, oh my God, and they smile, and it's like
they
oh,
call
man.
you ma'am.
It's
They're
wonderful.
very polite.
Once
Yeah.
a year, Fleet Week, they make New York women feel like $1 million.
Yes, they
That's
do.
all I can say.
They do. And I see that wherever I go, and every city is a part of the performance. So the city itself is a character. So whether it's New Orleans, which is a completely different scene than New York, or New York Fleet Week, or Seattle Fleet Week.
What do you think is the best? What's your favorite?
New Orleans.
Of course, New Orleans.
Yeah, I think because if you think about Bourbon Street on a regular Tuesday night, it's already crazy, and then you bring in like 2,500 sailors and Marines, and then it's just off.
One area, so they won't,
Yes, and they tend to go all in the same place and all in the same places.
So just one final question. You've been working on this project now for 8 years.
Yep.
And so there must be ups and downs, and do you have any thoughts where it's going to go? And
There's been a
how's
couple
it changed?
times.
Yeah.
There's been a couple times when I'm done. Like I was like, that's it. I guess it's over. I'm done. And then it has wheels and it keeps going. And I think that as a project that I've been working on, and I've been a photographer for 20 some odd years, I think that when this project, I just didn't let go of it. and it keeps going. And I think partly it's because I love it. And so I think you need to do what you love and photograph something that you actually have an obsession about, or you have something in your heart for it, and you will keep going. So it's emotional. There's ups and downs like anything, because it's really close to me, but keeps going. And I don't really see an end for it yet. We see. This year has just begun. My season has just begun, my hunting season.
All right, well, I would recommend that you follow Kitty on Instagram, and make sure to check out our feed at SVA_digital photo, where she did a takeover and posted many, many, many great pictures. Kitty, it's been a real pleasure having
Thank
you
you.
here.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you. Thank you.